Hey everyone! Today we're talking about some of weirdest thing people have ever done.
Some traditions don't disappear with a farewell. They fade quietly, slipping out of small towns, dinner tables, schoolyards, and county fairs, until one day, nobody remembers they ever existed at all. And some of them were strange enough to feel almost unreal now. 1. The towns that used to hold public possum drops. Long before giant LED countdowns and celebrity concerts took over New Year's Eve, some American towns welcomed the new year by lowering a live opossum from the sky. Not a mascot, not a fake prop, a real, blinking, terrified possum in a box. Crowds gathered in freezing parking lots while local radio hosts counted backward like it was completely normal. Kids screamed. Fireworks exploded. Somewhere above them, a confused animal slowly descended from a crane. And for years, nobody questioned it. In parts of the South, the possum drop became a genuine tradition, strange enough to attract tourists, local enough to survive without national attention. Then, animal rights groups stepped in. Lawsuits followed. Public backlash grew. Suddenly, the tradition that once symbolized hometown pride started looking deeply bizarre. Today, most Americans under 25 have never even heard of it, which is probably why it feels almost impossible that it ever happened at all. 2. Children once collected. Dead flies for school competitions. In the middle of the 1900s, American schools launched campaigns asking children to hunt flies. Thousands of them. Students carried jars through neighborhoods, kitchens, barns, and alleys, swatting insects for points like it was a competitive sport. Some schools even posted rankings publicly, turning dead flies into status symbols. The reason sounds logical at first. Flies spread disease. Cities wanted cleaner streets. Schools wanted children involved. But the execution became unbelievably intense. Entire classrooms smelled like bug spray and glass jars full of insect corpses. Kids bragged about body counts. Local newspapers celebrated the winners like athletes. One child reportedly collected over 1 million flies. Then attitudes changed, fast. People started realizing how unsettling it looked to train children to obsessively kill insects for rewards. Health campaigns evolved. The contests vanished almost overnight. Now it sounds less like public health, and more like something from a dystopian movie nobody remembers filming. 3. America once had real ugly laws. For decades, some U.S. cities quietly enforced laws that sound completely fictional now. If a person looked diseased, deformed, or unsightly, they could literally be banned from appearing in public spaces, not arrested for a crime, punished for being seen. These were called ugly laws, and they existed in multiple American cities starting in the late 1800s. Police had the power to remove people from sidewalks, parks, or public transport simply because their appearance made others uncomfortable. And the disturbing part? Most ordinary people barely questioned it. The laws targeted disabled people, injured workers, burn victims, and anyone society considered unpleasant to look at. For years, the rules blended into everyday life so quietly that entire generations grew up around them without resistance. Then, America slowly stopped talking about them. Today, the idea sounds almost unbelievable, like a dark rumor from another country or another century. But these laws were real, and they survived far longer than most people realize. 4. Telephone parties. Let entire neighborhoods listen to your calls. Imagine picking up your phone to call someone and realizing half your neighborhood might already be listening. For millions of Americans, that was normal. Before private phone lines became affordable, entire communities shared the same connection. These were called party lines, and every house on the line could technically hear every conversation happening around them. People learned each other's ring patterns. Some neighbors quietly listened in for entertainment. Others spread gossip from conversations they were never supposed to hear. In small towns, secrets barely survived 24 hours. And somehow, society adapted to it. Families lowered their voices automatically. Teenagers planned romances knowing strangers might be eavesdropping. Arguments became community events without anyone admitting it directly. Then technology advanced, private lines arrived, and the entire culture disappeared with shocking speed. Today, younger generations panic over phone tracking and social media privacy. Meanwhile, their grandparents once lived in a world where your neighbor could casually overhear your breakup from their kitchen. 5. Baby beauty contests used to fill massive stadiums. At one point in American history, parents packed enormous auditoriums to watch babies compete against each other under bright stage lights. Not toddlers, babies. Judges examined smiles, posture, weight, facial symmetry, and overall appeal, while crowds applauded like it was a sporting event. Some contests drew thousands of spectators. Newspapers published winners on front pages. Parents traveled across states hoping their child would be crowned the healthiest and most beautiful infant in America, and it became wildly popular. The contest started as health campaigns, supposedly encouraging proper childcare, but very quickly they turned into full-scale public spectacles. Sponsors appeared, rivalries formed, parents became obsessive, then public opinion shifted. What once looked wholesome started feeling deeply uncomfortable, especially as people questioned why infants were being ranked like products at a fair. Today, the entire phenomenon feels almost surreal. But for a while, America treated baby competitions like a completely normal weekend activity. 6. Ice blocks used to arrive at your door. Like milk deliveries. Before refrigerators became standard in American homes, entire neighborhoods depended on men carrying massive blocks of ice through the streets before sunrise. You could hear them coming long before you saw them. Wagon wheels scraping pavement, metal tongs clanking against frozen blocks wrapped in sawdust. Housewives placed handwritten cards in their windows to signal how many pounds they needed that day. Inside kitchens stood wooden ice boxes, quietly dripping into metal trays beneath shelves of butter, milk, and leftovers. Children sometimes chased the delivery wagons, hoping for tiny shards of ice during summer heat waves. The job itself looked brutal. Ice cutters worked in freezing warehouses or harvested giant slabs directly from frozen lakes during winter, storing them underground for warmer months. Then, electric refrigeration spread across America with shocking speed. Within a generation, the sound of the Iceman vanished from ordinary life, and with him disappeared an entire rhythm of daily American living. 7. Train stations once had separate waiting rooms for women. For decades, many American train stations contained spaces called ladies' waiting rooms, quieter, cleaner rooms designed specifically for women traveling alone. The difference was immediately visible. Outside, the main waiting halls smelled like coal smoke, tobacco, wet coats, and overheated radiators. Men slept across benches. Porters shouted departures above the noise of arriving trains. But behind another door, everything softened. Wallpaper, velvet chairs, potted plants, polished lamps. Women traveling with children often stayed there for hours between connections, protected from the chaos outside. Some rooms even had attendants, mirrors, writing desks, and private rest areas unavailable anywhere else in the station. At the time, Americans considered it civilized, respectable, necessary. But as train travel declined and gender norms shifted after World War II, the rooms slowly disappeared. Renovations erased them quietly. Many stations demolished them without preserving a single photograph. Today, most travelers walk through modern terminals with no idea these hidden worlds once existed behind those walls. 8. Americans once slept outside on purpose. During the early 1900s, sleeping outdoors became a serious health movement across the United States. Not camping, not recreation. Doctors genuinely believed fresh night air could cure disease. Families dragged beds onto porches year-round, even during brutal winters. Apartment buildings in crowded cities advertised sleeping balconies as luxury features. Schools sometimes placed sick children outside in rows beneath heavy blankets while snow collected around them. The fear behind it was tuberculosis, one of the deadliest diseases in America at the time. Fresh air was considered medicine. Stuffy indoor rooms were seen as dangerous traps filled with invisible contamination. Old photographs from the era feel strangely haunting now. Children asleep in open-air cribs beside apartment windows, adults wrapped in layers of wool under icy skies. Eventually, antibiotics changed everything. Medical understanding evolved. Central heating transformed architecture itself. And almost overnight, Americans stopped building homes designed for sleeping beneath the open air. 9. Funeral photography was once completely normal. In 19th century America, families sometimes gathered around deceased relatives for one final portrait, and they smiled in the photographs. At first glance, modern viewers often mistake these images for ordinary family pictures, until they notice one unsettling detail. one person isn't alive anymore. Postmortem photography became common because photographs were rare and expensive. For many families, death offered the first and only opportunity to preserve someone's image forever. Infants who died young were carefully posed in cribs. Parents rested hands gently on children who had already passed away hours earlier. Photographers became skilled at creating the illusion of life. They adjusted posture, painted open eyes onto negatives, and arranged rooms to feel peaceful rather than tragic. To Americans at the time, the practice felt loving, intimate, necessary. But as photography became cheaper and cultural attitudes toward death changed, the tradition slowly disappeared into silence. Now the images feel less historical and more like fragments from another emotional universe entirely. 10. People once gathered to watch marathon dancers collapse. During the Great Depression, dance marathons became one of the strangest forms of public entertainment in America. Couples danced for days, sometimes weeks. Inside, crowded ballrooms filled with cigarette smoke and exhausted spectators, contestants shuffled endlessly under bright lights while bands played through the night. Every few hours, organizers allowed short breaks for food or sleep before forcing everyone back onto the floor again. The prize money kept people going. During economic collapse, some competitors were desperate enough to destroy their bodies for a chance at cash, meals, or temporary shelter. Audiences watched the exhaustion like sport. People fainted mid-step, shoes filled with blood. Some contestants hallucinated from lack of sleep while announcers joked into microphones to keep crowds entertained. Eventually, public opinion turned against the marathons. Critics compared them to human exploitation disguised as fun. Cities began banning them outright. But for a brief moment in American history, survival itself became a spectator event. 11. Mail-order houses once arrived by train. For decades, Americans could buy an entire house from a catalog. Not house plans, the actual house. Companies like Sears mailed enormous catalogs filled with model homes featuring front porches, stained glass windows, built-in cabinets, and detailed floor plans. Families circled designs at kitchen tables the same way people browse furniture online today. After purchase, the materials arrived by railroad in thousands of numbered pieces. Lumber, nails, shingles, staircases, doors, even paint. Instruction manuals explained how to assemble everything step by step. Entire neighborhoods quietly emerged from these kits. Some homes looked modest and practical, others were surprisingly elegant, blending into American suburbs so naturally that many still stand today unnoticed by the people living inside them. Eventually, local developers, changing construction methods, and modern suburban expansion pushed the idea aside. But hidden across America are streets full of homes that technically began as giant mail packages shipped through the country by train. 12. Department stores used to feel like fantasy palaces. In the early 20th century, visiting a department store in America could feel closer to entering a theater than going shopping. Massive marble entrances opened into perfume-filled halls beneath glowing chandeliers. Restaurants played live piano music, while elevators operated by uniformed attendants carried shoppers between floors filled with gloves, silverware, hats, carpets, and exotic imported goods. For many small-town Americans visiting big cities like New York City or Chicago, these stores felt almost unreal. During Christmas, entire families traveled just to see animated window displays. Children pressed against glass, watching mechanical dolls move through snowy miniature villages, while crowds gathered on sidewalks for hours. And inside, the stores offered more than products. They offered aspiration, a carefully staged vision of elegance, wealth, and modern American life. Then malls replaced downtown retail culture. Online shopping erased ritual entirely. Today, most people buy household items alone on glowing screens, without realizing shopping once felt like attending an event. 13. People used to memorize entire phone books. Before smartphones quietly remembered everything for us, Americans carried dozens of phone numbers permanently inside their heads. Not just their own number, everyone's. Parents knew relatives, doctors, schools, workplaces, neighbors, and pizza places by memory alone. Teenagers memorized the numbers they cared about most almost automatically after a few late-night calls. Some people still remember childhood numbers from 40 years ago while forgetting passwords created yesterday. And there was pressure attached to it. If you forgot someone's number while outside the house, you were stranded. No contacts list, no search bar. Payphones forced people to rely on memory constantly, which meant certain voices and relationships became physically tied to sequences of digits in your brain. Then cell phones absorbed the burden completely. Today, many people barely know their partner's number without checking a screen first. The memory muscle disappeared so quietly that almost nobody noticed it happening. But something about modern connections started feeling less personal after that. 14. Silence used to exist in more places. There was a time when Americans regularly experienced silence without trying to create it. No podcasts in grocery stores, no videos playing in waiting rooms, no notifications vibrating in pockets every few minutes. Even boredom sounded different. Bus rides happened quietly. Elevators stayed awkwardly silent. Restaurants didn't blast playlists engineered to keep customers energized. People sat on porches with nothing but insects, distant traffic, or wind moving through trees. Now, silence feels almost suspicious. The moment a room becomes quiet, someone reaches for a phone. Airports glow with overlapping audio from screens nobody fully watches. Stores fill empty space with music designed to prevent people from leaving too quickly. And psychologically, people adapted to constant stimulation faster than they realize. Many Americans now struggle to sleep without background noise. Others panic slightly when their devices die unexpectedly. The brain became conditioned to uninterrupted input, which makes the older world feel strange in retrospect. Not because it lacked technology, but because it allowed moments where nothing happened at all. 15. Collect calls turned family conversations into negotiations. For years, American families mastered an oddly stressful ritual around payphones. The phone would ring late at night. Someone answered cautiously. Then an operator asked the same question. Will you accept the charges? Because receiving a long-distance call could cost serious money. Teenagers away at college spoke quickly to avoid extra charges. Parents cut conversations short mid-sentence. Travelers sometimes used coded messages during the collect call introduction so relatives could decline the charges after hearing the important information for free. Mom, I'm here, pick me up at 8. Click. Everyone understood the system, and underneath it sat a strange emotional reality. Talking to loved ones too long could literally become financially irresponsible. Distance had a measurable cost attached to it, which changed how people communicated. Today, unlimited calling feels invisible, automatic, almost meaningless. People ignore texts for hours while carrying instant access to anyone they know. But older generations still remember when hearing a familiar voice from far away felt expensive enough to make your chest tighten slightly before answering. 16. Ashtrays used to be everywhere. There was a period in America when nearly every surface seemed designed around cigarettes. Ashtrays sat in restaurants, hospitals, hotel rooms, office desks, bowling alleys, airplane armrests, and waiting rooms. Teachers smoked in school lounges, doctors appeared in cigarette advertisements, entire families ate dinner inside a haze that nobody commented on anymore. And the strangest part is how normal it felt. People stopped noticing the smell because everything smelled that way. Clothes, curtains, car interiors, elevators, all permanently carried traces of smoke. Children learned which restaurants had better ventilation the same way people now compare Wi-Fi speeds. Then culture shifted with incredible force. Smoking bans arrived. Public attitudes hardened. What once symbolized sophistication suddenly became associated with discomfort, addiction, and health anxiety. Now younger Americans walk into old casinos or forgotten bars and react immediately to the lingering smell. It feels intrusive now because modern life trained people to expect clean air indoors, something earlier generations barely imagined as possible. 17. Malls used to function like indoor towns. At their peak, American malls weren't just shopping centers. They were social ecosystems. Teenagers spent entire Saturdays wandering without buying anything. Elderly couples walked laps before stores opened. Friends met beneath giant fountains or food court clocks without texting first because everyone already knew the meeting spot. And emotionally, malls solved a problem modern life still hasn't replaced. They gave people somewhere to exist without needing a reason. Climate-controlled air, music echoing through corridors, the smell of pretzels, perfume, popcorn, and new clothes mixing together beneath artificial skylights. It created a strangely comforting version of public life. Then online shopping hollowed the experience out. Stores closed gradually at first, then all at once. Food courts emptied. Escalators kept running for buildings filled mostly with silence. Some malls still stand today half-lit and eerily clean, like abandoned simulations of normal American life. People joke about dead malls now. But underneath the nostalgia sits something more uncomfortable. Many communities never replaced the social function they lost. 18. Handwritten cursive quietly disappeared. Millions of Americans grew up believing cursive handwriting was an essential life skill. Teachers corrected every loop and slant with near-religious seriousness. Students practiced signatures for years because adulthood supposedly depended on elegant handwriting. Report cards even graded penmanship separately from academic performance. Now, many younger Americans can barely read cursive comfortably, and the shift happened faster than people realize. As keyboards replaced handwritten communication, schools quietly reduced instruction time. Bills became digital, letters disappeared, signatures turned into rushed scribbles on touchscreens. Entire generations stopped needing to write by hand for more than a few minutes at a time. What makes people uneasy isn't just the lost skill, it's what vanished with it. Old handwritten recipes, journals, postcards, and family letters suddenly feel emotionally heavier because they belong to a slower form of communication. Modern life rarely creates anymore. A text message disappears instantly. But handwriting still feels strangely tied to physical memory, personality, and presence in a way screens haven't fully replaced. 19. Answering machines created a different kind of anxiety. Before texting existed, missing a phone call carried real uncertainty. You came home, pressed a blinking button on the answering machine, and listened carefully to whoever had tried reaching you while you were gone. Sometimes it was harmless. Sometimes your stomach dropped immediately. The pauses mattered. Background noise mattered. Tone mattered. People rehearsed messages because every word would be replayed later. Some callers panicked after hearing their own voice recorded and hung up instantly, leaving only silence and breathing behind. Families gathered around machines together to hear updates from relatives. Teenagers screened calls from crushes. Parents dreaded hearing hospitals, schools, or unfamiliar voices after midnight. And unlike modern messaging, communication still felt incomplete until voices were physically heard aloud. Today, notifications arrive endlessly, but feel emotionally flatter somehow. People read messages silently while multitasking through 10 other conversations, but answering machines forced attention. For a few seconds, someone's voice completely occupied the room. 20. Neighborhoods used to recognize each other more. There was a time when many Americans unintentionally knew the rhythms of the people living around them. Not because communities were magically kinder, but because daily life happened more visibly. People sat outside. Children played in front yards until streetlights came on. Neighbors recognized each other's cars, routines, arguments, and visitors without trying. You noticed when someone stopped mowing their lawn or suddenly disappeared for several days. Modern life became more private, but also more isolated. Garage doors open and close like automatic shields. Deliveries arrive without human interaction. Streaming replaced front porch conversations and shared television schedules. In some apartment buildings, people live beside each other for years without learning a single name. And psychologically, something changed with that disappearance. Older Americans often describe past neighborhoods as annoying, intrusive, and gossip-heavy, but also strangely comforting during emergencies or loneliness. Now many people enjoy more privacy than ever before, while quietly feeling less connected to the physical world directly outside their door. 21. The day television stations simply stopped. Late at night, millions of Americans once watched their televisions slowly die before their eyes. One moment, sitcoms, commercials, baseball games. The next, a solemn national anthem, a waving flag, and then sudden static hissing across the screen for hours until morning. Children accidentally falling asleep on couches often woke up to that ghostly white noise filling dark living rooms at 3 a.m., turning ordinary houses into something eerie and unfamiliar. There were no endless channels, no autoplay. Television itself literally ended for the night. And somehow, that created a strange psychological boundary modern media erased completely. Entertainment had limits. The country collectively powered down together. Today, streaming platforms never sleep, screens never truly go dark, and silence rarely interrupts the flow anymore. But older generations still remember the unsettling feeling of staring at static after midnight, realizing there was suddenly nothing left to watch except an empty signal humming through the dark. 22. Children once ran home, terrified of the streetlights. For generations of American kids, the sound of evening wasn't a phone notification. It was mothers yelling names from porches while streetlights flickered alive one by one across suburban roads. That moment meant the same thing everywhere: get home immediately. Basketball games ended mid-score. Bicycle tires screeched against pavement. Groups of children scattered through neighborhoods racing fading daylight before someone's father got angry. And strangely, nobody needed text messages to coordinate it. Entire childhoods operated on instinct, routine, and the shared understanding that once the lights came on, freedom ended. Then modern parenting changed everything slowly. Organized schedules replaced unsupervised wandering. Phones tracked movement constantly. Kids stopped disappearing outside for 6 straight hours without adults knowing where they were. Today, the old ritual feels almost cinematic. Dusty summer air, distant sprinklers, sneakers pounding sidewalks at dusk, because it belonged to a version of American childhood that quietly vanished before anyone realized it was ending. 23. There was a time when airplane travel felt luxurious. In the 1960s, walking through an American airport felt less like entering transportation and more like entering a formal event. Men wore suits, women wore dresses and gloves. Flight attendants greeted passengers like hotel staff, while real silverware clinked beneath soft cabin lighting thousands of feet above the ground. Children pressed faces against massive terminal windows, watching jets arrive like futuristic machines from another world. And then came the smoking sections, the steak dinners, the piano lounges inside airports themselves. Flying was expensive enough that people treated it almost ceremonially. Families even visited airports just to watch planes take off for entertainment. Then deregulation changed everything. Ticket prices dropped, security intensified, crowded terminals replaced glamour with efficiency. Today, passengers remove shoes under fluorescent lights while fighting over overhead luggage space. But hidden inside old photographs is a completely different America. One where boarding a plane briefly made ordinary people feel important, sophisticated, and slightly untouchable. 24. Radio DJs once controlled entire towns' emotional atmosphere. Long before algorithms quietly chose music for individuals, local American radio DJs controlled the emotional soundtrack of entire cities at once. Teenagers sat beside bedroom radios with cassette tapes ready, waiting for favorite songs to appear unexpectedly. Truck drivers crossed midnight highways listening to familiar voices they never met, but somehow trusted deeply. During snowstorms, blackouts, or tragedies, communities gathered around radios because the person speaking on air often sounded calmer and more human than anyone else available. Some DJs became local celebrities powerful enough to launch careers or destroy songs overnight with a single opinion. Then, media fractured. Streaming personalized everything. People stopped hearing the same songs simultaneously. The collective experience dissolved. Today, millions listen privately through headphones while walking past each other in silence. But older Americans still remember certain radio voices with almost unsettling emotional clarity. Because for years, strangers sitting alone in dark rooms felt connected through the exact same voice echoing from glowing speakers at the exact same moment. 25. The milkman used to know which families were struggling every morning before sunrise. Glass bottles rattled softly on porches across America, while milkmen moved house to house through quiet streets. It looked simple from the outside: deliveries, receipts, small talk. But the milkman often knew more about neighborhoods than almost anyone else. He noticed which homes stopped ordering full bottles during difficult months, which fathers disappeared, which elderly residents hadn't collected yesterday's delivery. During harsh winters, some families quietly found extra milk left behind without explanation because local delivery workers understood pride too well to embarrass struggling parents openly. And because they visited constantly, they became woven into neighborhood life in a way modern delivery systems never replicated. Then supermarkets expanded, refrigeration improved, and home delivery collapsed almost overnight. Today, groceries appear through apps handled by anonymous drivers following GPS routes. But older Americans still describe the milkman less like a worker and more like a background character from a vanished version of community life. 26. Drive-in theaters turned parking lots into tiny worlds. At night, American drive-in theaters transformed empty fields into glowing oceans of headlights beneath giant outdoor screens towering against the dark. Teenagers hid beer bottles under seats. Parents loaded children into pajamas before movies even started. Somewhere in the distance, tinny audio crackled through hanging car speakers while insects smashed softly against windshields under projector light. And because everyone stayed inside cars, the atmosphere felt strangely private and communal at the same time. Couples fought quietly, families passed popcorn through open windows, kids fell asleep in back seats while horror films flickered silently above them. But television, rising land prices, and changing entertainment habits slowly killed most drive-ins off. Entire generations stopped associating movies with warm summer air and rows of idling engines beneath the stars. Today, the surviving drive-ins feel almost dreamlike. Remnants of an America where entertainment briefly escaped buildings altogether and turned ordinary parking lots into temporary nighttime worlds. 27. Families once gathered around one single television. In many American homes, the television wasn't background noise. It was the center of gravity. There was one screen, maybe two channels worth watching, and an entire family negotiating what mattered enough to appear on it. Fathers controlled volume knobs like territory. Children waited all week for specific cartoons because missing an episode meant it was simply gone. Commercial breaks triggered races to kitchens and bathrooms before shows resumed. And when major events happened, moon landings, presidential speeches, disasters, millions of households watched simultaneously, reacting together in real time. Then screens multiplied, bedrooms gained televisions, laptops arrived, phones finished the process completely. Now families often sit in the same room wearing headphones, each consuming separate worlds through separate algorithms. The old experience wasn't perfect. Arguments over channels were legendary, but it created shared cultural memory almost automatically. Today, entertainment became infinite. Shared attention became rare. 28. Americans once feared being buried alive. In the late 1800s, fear spread through America that doctors might accidentally declare people dead too early. Newspapers printed horrifying stories of coffins scratched from the inside. Families whispered about bodies discovered in twisted positions after exhumations, and soon the paranoia became serious enough to reshape funerals themselves. Inventors designed safety coffins equipped with bells, breathing tubes, flags, and escape mechanisms allowing supposedly dead people to signal from underground if they woke up. Some wealthy Americans even delayed burials intentionally, terrified of making irreversible mistakes. The fear sounds irrational now, but medicine at the time was primitive enough that uncertainty felt genuinely possible. Then modern embalming, diagnostics, and hospital systems slowly erased the panic from public consciousness. But buried deep inside old cemeteries and forgotten patents remains evidence of a disturbing reality. For a brief moment, Americans became collectively obsessed with the possibility of waking up trapped beneath the earth. 29. Teenagers once cruised the same streets. Every weekend before social media gave teenagers infinite places to disappear digitally, American teens physically circled the same streets over and over looking for each other. On Friday nights, engines rumbled through downtown strips lined with neon diners, gas stations, and parking lots glowing beneath sodium lights. Cars moved slowly enough for conversations through open windows. Everyone recognized everyone else's vehicles. Relationships started, ended, and exploded publicly across traffic lights, while local police pretended not to notice minor chaos unless things got out of control. The goal wasn't even destination. It was visibility, to be seen, to exist inside the social map of the town for a few hours. Then malls declined, gas prices rose, internet culture exploded, and cruising laws shut many scenes down entirely. Today, younger generations socialize through disappearing messages and private feeds instead. But older Americans still remember nights spent driving nowhere for hours, because somehow that felt like freedom. 30. People used to leave their doors unlocked at night. Older Americans still tell stories about sleeping with unlocked doors, and younger generations often react like they're describing another planet. But for many towns and suburbs, it genuinely was normal. Children ran between houses without warning. Neighbors borrowed tools directly from garages. Some families didn't even carry house keys regularly because someone was almost always home anyway. Of course, crime still existed, Memory softens reality, but psychologically there was less expectation of intrusion woven into daily life. Then came non-stop televised crime coverage, rising suburban isolation, alarm systems, and eventually smartphones delivering danger directly into people's pockets 24 hours a day. Locks became smarter, cameras appeared everywhere, front doors turned into security checkpoints. And even in safe neighborhoods, many Americans now double-check deadbolts automatically before bed without fully knowing why. The country didn't just become more cautious, it became more aware of fear itself. 31. Some hospitals once kept dying patients hidden from themselves. For much of American history, hospitals often avoided telling patients they were dying at all. Families and doctors made the decision privately, then constructed entire fake realities around people spending their final weeks alive. Nurses smiled normally, conversations stayed artificially cheerful, terminal diagnoses became whispered secrets exchanged in hallways while the patient sat only feet away unaware everyone else already knew the ending. In some hospitals, charts were deliberately hidden when patients entered rooms. Doctors used vague phrases like fatigue or infection instead of cancer, because many believed the truth itself could kill hope faster than disease. And culturally, most people accepted the silence. Death was treated less like information someone deserved and more like a burden others managed for them. Today, brutal medical honesty can feel cold, but the older system carried its own darkness, entire human beings slowly realizing something terrible was happening while everyone around them pretended otherwise. 32. Children used to practice. Hiding from nuclear war. Across America during the Cold War, elementary school classrooms suddenly stopped normal lessons so children could rehearse surviving atomic bombs. Teachers calmly instructed students to crawl beneath tiny wooden desks, cover their heads, and wait while sirens echoed through school hallways. Some drills became so routine that children barely questioned them anymore. Others went home terrified after realizing adults genuinely expected nuclear attack to happen someday. Schools distributed survival pamphlets. Families built backyard fallout shelters stocked with canned food, water drums, and radiation instructions. Entire suburban neighborhoods quietly organized around the possibility that civilization could vanish within minutes. And psychologically, it changed a generation permanently. Imagine being 8 years old while adults repeatedly train you for apocalypse without ever fully admitting how hopeless survival actually would have been. Eventually, the drills faded, the sirens stopped. But many older Americans still describe a constant low-level dread humming beneath childhood itself. The fear that one ordinary afternoon could suddenly become the last one on Earth. 33. America once displayed premature babies like attractions. In the early 1900s, desperate parents brought premature infants to public exhibitions where strangers paid money to stare at them through glass incubators beneath bright lights. It sounds monstrous now, but at the time these baby incubator shows often offered the only advanced medical care available. Hospitals considered premature babies hopeless cases. Most refused treatment entirely. So showman doctors created sideshow-style exhibits at amusement parks and world fairs where crowds purchased tickets while nurses fought to keep tiny infants alive behind windows. The atmosphere felt deeply unsettling. Popcorn stands nearby, carnival music in the distance, people casually observing fragile newborns no larger than dolls. Yet paradoxically, thousands of babies survived because of these exhibits. The public spectacle funded medical technology mainstream healthcare systems ignored. Eventually, hospitals adopted incubator treatment properly, and the sideshows disappeared. But for decades, America blurred the line between entertainment and survival in ways that now feel almost impossible to process emotionally. 34. Telephone operators secretly heard. America's most private moments. Before direct dialing became common, millions of Americans relied on human operators to connect calls manually, which meant strangers quietly sat between some of the most emotional conversations in people's lives. Operators heard marriage proposals, final goodbyes, drunken confessions, emergency calls, affairs, business deals, screaming arguments, and news of deaths unfolding live through headsets hour after hour. And because many operators worked in small towns, anonymity barely existed. Some women became local vaults of secrets without intending to. Others spread gossip accidentally or intentionally after overhearing scandals involving neighbors, politicians, or respected families. Americans understood this on some level, which created strange coded behavior during phone calls. Lowered voices, vague language, pauses when discussing sensitive topics. Then automation erased operators almost completely. Privacy improved technologically, but something eerie remained behind in hindsight. For decades, parts of American emotional life quietly passed through anonymous switchboards staffed by people nobody ever saw. 35. Mental institutions once operated. Like hidden cities, at their peak, massive American psychiatric hospitals functioned almost like isolated towns hidden from public view. Some housed thousands of patients behind locked gates, surrounded by farmland, tunnels, laundries, cemeteries, bakeries, and power plants. Families dropped relatives off for reasons that ranged from severe illness to alcoholism, depression, epilepsy, hysteria, or simply becoming socially inconvenient. And once inside, many people disappeared for years, some forever. Overcrowding transformed many institutions into nightmares of sedation, restraint, and neglect. Patients wandered endless hallways under flickering lights while administrators struggled to manage populations larger than entire small towns. Yet from the outside, these places often looked beautiful. Enormous brick campuses with gardens and towering trees designed to appear peaceful and civilized. Then public scandals erupted. Investigations exposed abuse. Deinstitutionalization emptied many hospitals rapidly during the late 20th century. Today, abandoned psychiatric campuses still stand across America like haunted monuments to a system society quietly tried to forget existed. 36. Carnival midways. Once terrified parents for real reasons. Traveling carnivals once rolled into American towns carrying excitement, lights, cheap prizes, and genuine danger lurking beneath the music. Safety regulations were weak or nearly non-existent for much of the 20th century. Rides assembled overnight by exhausted crews sometimes malfunctioned catastrophically. Electrical fires spread through temporary wiring. Rusted machinery groaned violently, while children lined up anyway because the spectacle itself felt irresistible. Parents often sensed the risk but took kids regardless because carnivals represented rare excitement arriving briefly from somewhere else. And the midway atmosphere amplified everything. Distorted calliope music, spinning lights in foggy night air, strangers shouting through microphones, generators vibrating beneath muddy ground. Some accidents became national headlines, horrifying enough to permanently scar communities. Others disappeared into local memory quietly. Modern amusement parks feel sanitized by comparison. But older traveling carnivals carried a darker unpredictability, the uneasy feeling that behind the flashing bulbs and cotton candy, something could suddenly go terribly wrong. 37. Families used to pose with dead animals after hunts. For generations, Americans proudly photographed children standing beside massive dead animals after successful hunts. Deer hanging upside down from trees, piles of rabbits, foxes stretched across truck hoods, ducks covering entire lawns. The photographs often looked celebratory. Smiling fathers rested hands on rifles while children posed proudly beside bloodied carcasses almost larger than themselves. At the time, nobody considered the images disturbing. Hunting represented survival, tradition, masculinity, food, and rural identity woven deeply into American life. But culturally, the emotional relationship between people and animals began changing during the late 20th century. Urbanization distanced millions from slaughter and farming realities. Pets increasingly became treated like family members rather than property. Suddenly, the old photographs started feeling emotionally complicated, even shocking to younger generations. Yet hidden in garages, photo albums, and dusty shoeboxes across America are reminders of a time when confronting death directly, even proudly, formed a completely ordinary part of growing up. 38. Some Americans once slept beside loaded guns. Every night in isolated rural parts of America, especially during the early and mid-20th century, many families routinely slept with loaded firearms within arm's reach every single night. Not because danger was immediate, but because distance itself created vulnerability. Police might be hours away. Wild animals prowled outside farms. Strangers on remote roads felt genuinely threatening after dark. Children grew up understanding which drawer held the shotgun and which sounds outside mattered enough to wake adults immediately. And psychologically, it created a very different relationship with fear. Homes felt both protected and fragile at the same time. Islands of light surrounded by darkness, weather, isolation, and uncertainty. Over time, suburbanization, emergency services, and changing cultural attitudes softened some of that nightly tension for many Americans. But older generations still describe rural nights with a kind of primal realism modern urban life rarely experiences anymore. The awareness that once the sun disappeared, your safety depended mostly on whoever was inside the house with you. 39. Entire families once shared. Bathwater. For many working-class American households, before modern plumbing became widespread, bathing followed a strict order. One tub, one heated batch of water. Everyone used it. Parents first, then older children, then younger siblings last, sitting in water already cloudy from an entire family washing before them. The phrase, "don't throw the baby out with the bathwater," suddenly feels less metaphorical when you realize how dark the water sometimes became by the end. And emotionally, the ritual revealed how physically close people once lived to one another's discomfort. Privacy barely existed inside crowded homes, heated by coal stoves and lit dimly enough that exhaustion hid embarrassment. Then indoor plumbing transformed daily life so completely that people forgot how recently basic hygiene itself demanded coordination, labor, and compromise. Today, hot showers arrive instantly through silent pipes. But hidden underneath modern comfort is a forgotten reality. Millions of Americans once treated warmth, cleanliness, and personal space as luxuries rationed carefully inside the home. 40. America once had human alarm clocks. Before affordable alarm clocks became common, some Americans paid strangers called knocker-uppers to wake them before work each morning. In dark industrial cities and factory towns, these workers walked empty streets before sunrise, tapping on windows with long sticks, bamboo poles, or tiny hammers until customers woke up inside. Some even used pea shooters to hit second-story windows accurately in freezing rain or snow. Imagine the atmosphere. Silent neighborhoods at 4 a.m., factory smoke drifting overhead, footsteps echoing while exhausted workers waited in darkness for someone outside to summon them back into another day of labor. And if the knocker-upper failed, people could lose jobs entirely. Time itself depended on another human being arriving outside your window consistently every morning. Then cheap clocks, telephones, and eventually smartphones erased the profession almost completely. But the image remains strangely haunting. An entire country once waking not to digital tones, but to strangers physically knocking people back into consciousness before dawn. 41. People used to dress. Children like tiny adults. Old American photographs of children often feel strangely unsettling for one reason. They barely look like children at all. Boys wore miniature suits with stiff collars and polished shoes. Girls sat perfectly still in elaborate dresses, heavy enough to restrict movement entirely. Smiling was rare because long exposure times made photographs difficult. But the deeper discomfort comes from something else. Childhood itself once felt far less separate from adulthood. Many children worked young, obeyed strict public behavior rules, and were expected to mirror adult manners constantly. Toys existed, but innocence wasn't protected the same way modern culture protects it now. Then the 20th century slowly reinvented childhood into its own emotional universe, filled with cartoons, bright colors, playrooms, and developmental psychology. Looking back at those older images now feels almost eerie because the children seem caught between worlds, young in age, but carrying the posture and seriousness of adults, already preparing them for hardship. 42. Graveyards once functioned like public parks. Before modern parks became widespread, many Americans spent weekends relaxing in cemeteries. Families packed lunches beside gravestones. Couples walked beneath trees lining elaborate burial gardens. Children played quietly among monuments, while adults escaped crowded industrial cities for fresh air and silence. To modern eyes, the idea feels disturbing, but 19th century cemeteries were intentionally designed as peaceful landscapes meant for reflection, conversation, and public life. Some became among the most beautiful places in entire cities, filled with sculptures, ponds, winding paths, and carefully maintained flowers. Then attitudes toward death shifted dramatically during the 20th century. Cemeteries became emotionally separated from ordinary life. Visiting them turned solemn, private, uncomfortable. But older photographs reveal crowds casually sitting among graves without fear or awkwardness. And maybe that says something deeper about modern culture itself. Americans didn't just remove death from daily conversation. They physically pushed it out of the spaces where everyday life once unfolded. 43. The sound of typewriters once filled entire cities. There was a period when office buildings across America sounded mechanical, in a way modern life almost never does anymore. Thousands of typewriters hammered simultaneously behind windows in downtown towers from morning until evening, sharp metallic rhythms echoing through insurance firms, newspapers, government offices, courtrooms, and hotel lobbies. Secretaries developed extraordinary speed, while cigarette smoke curled beneath fluorescent lights and stacks of paper accumulated beside ringing telephones. Mistakes mattered because correcting them physically scarred the page. Every sentence carried weight you could hear. Then computers arrived quietly at first, then all at once. The sound vanished within a generation. Today, offices glow silently except for keyboards soft enough to disappear into air conditioning hum. But older Americans still remember the emotional texture of those rooms. The clacking urgency, the pressure, the feeling that entire cities once literally sounded like people working themselves toward exhaustion behind walls of paper and noise. 44. Families once waited. Days for news that now arrives instantly. When tragedy struck decades ago, information traveled slowly enough to create entire emotional limbos. Modern people rarely experience anymore. Families waited beside radios for military updates. Wives stared through windows, hoping telegram boys would pass their house without stopping. Parents checked mailboxes repeatedly for letters from children stationed overseas, knowing silence could mean absolutely anything. And because communication moved slower, fear lasted longer. There were stretches of time where people simply did not know if loved ones were alive. Today, a missed text message creates anxiety within minutes because modern technology conditioned people to expect constant confirmation. But older generations lived inside uncertainty routinely. Airplanes vanished without updates. Storms cut communication entirely. Long-distance relationships survived mostly through delayed words arriving on paper days or weeks later, which means America didn't just gain faster communication over time. It lost an entire emotional condition built around waiting, imagining, and enduring silence without answers. 45. Some schools once had rifle clubs in basements. In parts of mid-century America, students stayed after school not for esports or robotics clubs, but for shooting practice. High schools stored rifles in locked basements. Teenagers learned marksmanship inside gym-adjacent ranges, while teachers supervised calmly nearby. In rural communities especially, the activity barely raised concern because firearms were associated with hunting, discipline, and civic responsibility more than public fear. Yearbooks even included rifle teams posing proudly beside targets. Looking back now feels surreal, because the emotional meaning surrounding schools and weapons transformed so dramatically over the past few decades. Modern Americans instinctively associate those spaces with vulnerability and anxiety instead. But the older tradition reveals something psychologically larger than nostalgia or politics. Cultures can completely redefine the emotional symbolism of ordinary objects within a single lifetime. The building remained the same. The lockers remained the same. Yet the atmosphere surrounding them changed so profoundly that the past now feels almost unrecognizable. 46. Elderly relatives once died at home. More often for much of American history, death usually happened inside the house. Children heard it. Families witnessed it. Relatives gathered in nearby rooms while clocks ticked softly and curtains stayed partially closed against afternoon light. Bodies were sometimes prepared inside the home before funerals, allowing loved ones to sit quietly with the dead for hours or even days. The experience was painful, intimate, unavoidable. Then hospitals, nursing homes, and professional funeral industries gradually moved death behind institutional walls. Modern Americans became safer, healthier, and longer-lived, but also more separated from the physical reality of dying itself. Today, many people reach adulthood having never seen a dead body in real life. And psychologically, that distance changed something profound. Death became less visible, yet somehow more terrifying, appearing suddenly through phone calls and hospital corridors rather than unfolding naturally within ordinary life. Older traditions disappeared partly because they were difficult, but maybe also because they forced people to confront mortality too directly. 47. entire American towns used to disappear. Quietly across the United States are places where streets still exist, houses still stand, and churches still face empty roads, but the people are gone. Some towns died after highways rerouted traffic elsewhere. Others collapsed when mines closed, factories relocated, railroads vanished, or drought destroyed local economies. And unlike dramatic disasters, many communities disappeared slowly enough that residents barely noticed the ending while living through it. One family moved away, then another storefront emptied, then Friday night football crowds shrank, schools consolidated, movie theaters closed. Eventually, entire generations stopped returning after graduation. What remains now often feels deeply unsettling. Faded signs, silent gas stations, peeling paint beneath enormous skies. America likes to imagine itself constantly expanding forward, but hidden across the country are quiet reminders that entire ways of life can evaporate without headlines or ceremony, not destroyed violently, just abandoned gradually by time itself. 48. People used to believe the future would feel more human than this. In the mid-20th century, Americans imagined the future constantly. Old magazines, television specials, and classroom films promised a world filled with incredible technology, but also more leisure, stronger communities, happier families, and deeper connection. Automation was supposed to reduce stress. Suburbs were supposed to create belonging. Communication technology was supposed to bring people emotionally closer together. And for a while, the future looked beautiful in advertisements. Smiling neighbors, children riding bicycles safely through endless evenings, families laughing around glowing kitchen tables beneath sleek modern architecture. But somewhere along the way, the emotional texture changed. Technology accelerated faster than people adapted psychologically. Public spaces became quieter, lonelier, more individualized. Convenience increased while shared rituals disappeared one by one. And that may be the strangest vanished American tradition of all. The old belief that progress automatically meant people would feel less isolated than they do now. Maybe the strangest part isn't that these traditions disappeared. It's how completely people adapted afterward, forgetting entire ways of living so thoroughly that the old world now feels less like history, and more like evidence from a civilization that quietly dissolved into this one.
Like it fast, don't let it end hard. Hit subscribe, think ends.